Hello Year 11, so we're at video 9 now. Video 9 is going to be focusing on a really important part of your course, looking at the economy and workers. Obviously one of the main reasons the Nazis were elected into government in 1933 was they promised people work and bread, they promised people jobs. We know that the economy was a huge issue for a lot of the German population, and that's why they turned to the Nazis. So what we're going to do is focus on two things in this video. First of all, we're going to look at the economy as a whole. What did the Nazis do to try and repair the economy and kind of meet the demands that the people had upon them based on the fact of their election promises? And secondly, we're going to look at how the workers as individuals were affected. And that's important to know because, you know, in previous videos we've looked at the life of women in Nazi Germany, we've looked at young people in Nazi Germany, so we're now going to look at how workers were affected by the Nazis. But let's start off with the economy as a whole. The Nazis came in, obviously with this election promise of giving people jobs, and we could look at the economy, or the Nazi aims for the economy, as having three aims. We look at them having the three aims of rearming the country. Obviously the Nazis thought rearmament would be important, it would meet Hitler's foreign policy aims. The second aim was self-sufficiency. The reason, or one of the main reasons Germany lost World War I is because they were not able to feed its population and provide the materials it needed for war by itself. So one of the main aims was to make Germany self-sufficient, being able to have the materials, the food for their own country within their own nation so that they didn't have to rely on imports. And thirdly, reducing unemployment, the big sticking point, making sure that people had a job so that they could put food on the table for their families. So what did the Nazis do to try and tackle these issues, and what did they do to try and meet these three aims? So first of all, we can see that they set up the RAD. These are work projects for men between the age of 18 and 25, and they were compulsory. A compulsory 6 months work, where these men would go and work on different projects that the Nazis organised, for example, building the autobahns or the motorways. And these projects were lowly paid, so they weren't paid really pocket money, but they were given free meals, in addition to the small pay they got, and it gave people a job. People weren't homeless, people weren't on the streets, they were making use of their time by producing stuff for the nation and earning a little bit of money, but also having some food, but actually gaining the necessary skills and maybe perhaps being more employable in the future. So it was a way of reducing unemployment quickly, getting things done cheaply, but also making sure those workers had a job. Secondly, we've got the public work schemes. So linking with the RAD, these public work schemes, the Nazis wanted to make the country more efficient and get things done. So the building of motorways or autobahns, hospitals, schools, a whole manner of public works projects were set up by the Nazis around the nation for people to get jobs, to get themselves doing things for the country to make it stronger as a whole. And again, that gives people jobs, gives people opportunities, whilst also making the Nazi economy stronger. We also look at the big one, rearmament. How did the Nazis try and make sure they rearm? Secretly at first, but the Nazis try and put any money and resources that they have from trade or anything else towards rearming and making the military stronger, being more of a force. Now having a strong military means you actually provide more jobs. You've got to supply weapons, you've got to supply uniforms, you've got to supply a whole manner of things for those soldiers. So that will make the economy stronger as a whole. Rearming was about putting that money in there, but it also was the introduction of conscription in 1935, which ended a lot of the unemployment because people now had a job. But it also meant there was more people in the army, hence the economy gets stronger because more things needed to be provided for that army. We can divide the economy into two plans. We can look at how the Nazis had these big things that took over, the public works schemes, the RAD, etc. But we could actually put them into two different economic ministers that the Nazis appointed. First of all was a guy called Schacht. Now Schacht was an economist, he was an expert in the economy, and he came up with ideas of how to stimulate the German economy from 1933. Now his ideas were based on the idea of trading with other countries, maybe not countries like Britain, but countries in places like South America. And the idea was, Germany wasn't ready to be self-sufficient, but they could reduce unemployment and make themselves stronger as an economy by trading off for those raw materials they didn't have with things that Germany did have. So lots of deals and trade deals were done with other countries to try and swap raw materials for produced goods in German factories, and this made the economy really successful. Now Schacht was repairing the economy in a lot of ways and able to produce goods for the army, maybe not as much as Hitler wanted. He was actually sacked, he was replaced by Hermann Göring. Göring had a 4-year plan. Now, the main aim of his 4-year plan was to almost put aside the trade deals and to make sure Germany was ready for war. And he focused a lot of his focus onto making sure Germany had the weapons and the materials to fight a war, and almost sideline a lot of the ideas or a lot of the projects that may be related to other things. So we're looking at the economy there, the different things that the Nazis did: conscription in the army, the RAD, giving men a job between the ages of 18 and 25, and we've also got the public work schemes. Now, Schacht and Göring had those two separate plans, but how successful were they? So when we look at the success, we can look at those three strands again, at those three aims. The first strand that I spoke about was rearmament, the second one was self-sufficiency, and the third one was reducing unemployment. Let's go with unemployment first of all. Did the Nazis successfully reduce unemployment? Yes, they did. If we look at the unemployment figures from 1933, when the Nazis come into power, it's around 6 million. By the time World War II starts in 1939, unemployment had gone down to about 400,000 people. So we can see the evident success of the Nazi economic policies. Or do we? We have to remember there's also a group of people we like to refer to as the invisible unemployed. The invisible unemployed are people who are excluded, so they're not as part of the employment figures. So people on that list would be Jewish people, for example, or women who gave up their jobs based on Nazi policies towards women in a previous video, would give up their jobs to look after the children and get married, and actually they would be excluded from the figures as well. So whether the 400,000 is a true reflection of unemployment in Germany is something to be questioned. We also then look at the rearmament. Did Germany successfully rearm? That was one of their aims. Now, we can definitely say that their army was getting bigger and was being able to be resourced well. The army by 1939 had reached 1.4 million. If you remember back to the Treaty of Versailles, 1933, obviously the Treaty of Versailles was 1919, but if we go look at 1933, the German army was still at that limit, 100,000 men. By 1939, it had gone to 1.4 million. So an increase in size, and they were resourced, so we can say that the rearmament was pretty successful. Schacht had increased production in the armed forces. There was more tanks, there was more weapons, there was more uniforms, and Göring was successful in making sure that Germany was ready for war footing in 1939. We cannot say they were completely ready for war. They still relied on raw materials like oil to be able to keep their army moving. So actually, when we say, had they rearmed, yes, they were ready in a lot of the resources they had, but they still needed to rely on other people to make sure that army was fully functioning. So they rearmed quite well, but were they completely ready for war in 1939? Probably not. When we look at self-sufficiency, which was the big stumbling block, the thing that made Germany lose World War I essentially, we look at actually Germany was never successful by 1939 of being self-sufficient. A lot of raw materials, as I've said before, still needed to be imported by the time Germany went to war in 1939, which would obviously have an impact on that rearmament, but also on that self-sufficiency. And as well as that, there was severe shortages in other aspects. I told you that Göring took charge of the economy and focused it on the military. That put aside a lot of the other areas of the economy. The most famous example is butter. Butter was really hard to come by in Germany. It had to be rationed early on, and that was because there was a lack and a shortage of it. So Göring famously said, would you rather have guns or butter? He said, butter makes us fat, guns make us strong. But that is another bit lacking. Remember, starvation ended Germany's role in World War I. It was having another impact on World War II, as we'll see later. So that's the economy. Was Germany successful? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. But what about the workers, the working class people that were relied upon by the Nazis to make sure the economy functioned, to make sure the country was ready for war and Germany was able to achieve its aims? So the workers. The Nazis, you can say, had 4 aims for the workers. They wanted to make their leisure time spent in the way that the Nazis wanted them to spend it, mixing with this idea of brainwashing and making sure people were good Nazis. We have making sure their political beliefs, that's the second point, making sure their political beliefs align with the Nazis. So whatever they were doing, they felt they were doing for the good of the Nazi party and for the country. They wanted to make sure that they had control over the working conditions, the working hours, to make sure that Germany was able to produce the things it needed for war and for Hitler's aims. And finally, the fourth one was obviously giving those workers jobs. They wanted the Nazis in power to give them jobs, so they needed to make sure they met that requirement. So what did they do? The first thing they do is they set up their own trade union, as it were, the DAF, the German Labour Front. So trade unions were banned, if you can remember from a previous video when I said how Hitler became dictator. So actually, by coming up with the DAF, the Labour Front, this actually would replace trade unions. All German workers had to be part of it, and they controlled the working hours, the conditions of German workers. If you had a dispute or you had a complaint, you went to the DAF. That made sure the Nazis would approve things and help in things that maybe would be manageable or acceptable for the Nazi Party, and they could put things aside that they didn't want to. Alongside that, there's two things to remember. We have the Beauty of Labour scheme. Now, the Beauty of Labour was the idea of making the working environment a better place to be. This would make workers happier, make them more productive, but also keep them on the side of the Nazis. The Beauty of Labour tried to provide extra meals, more ventilation, better gym facilities, health facilities within the work environment. And that was a really good scheme because a lot of working places became a little bit more enjoyable to work in, by and large. However, you have to remember, whilst we're thinking about this, that a lot of workers had to spend overtime building the facilities to supply the Beauty of Labour scheme. So if they said we're going to put ventilation in, often the workers had to provide it for themselves by working on those projects. But the Beauty of Labour did make work a little bit better. The Strength Through Joy was the other scheme that the Nazis came up with for workers, and that was trying to make the workplace more enjoyable, but also make working and working hard a really enjoyable experience and give the workers something to do as a reward for working so hard. So they provided entertainment, leisure activities outside of the workplace that focused on Nazi ideals, but were supposed to be fun and a reward. So they would give them cinema outings, theatre tickets, cruises, things like that. A lot of the time it was work on. The harder you work, the more opportunities you got to go on those leisure activities, which gave people an incentive to work harder. We also, while we're thinking about Strength Through Joy, can also think about the People's Car. The Volkswagen car was provided for German workers if they joined this scheme. The People's Car scheme was the idea that you save up a little bit of your wages every week and you put it into a savings book essentially, or a stamp for every time you give up some of your wage, and then you would collect these stamps until you collected a full book of stamps and you would get a new Volkswagen car. It was a swindle. The government never actually provided a car for any of the German population, but the idea was there was an incentive for those workers. So did it work?